I think one of the biggest challenges that educators face is being recognised and being valued. In recent times, I've been talking to lots and lots of managers, and regrettably actually, in many of those conversations, they've ended up in tears. And there are two words that they predominantly use. One is tired and one is undervalued. And I think we have a situation where people are used to a degree and abused. And when I say undervalued, predominantly undervalued by government. And I think they have to be recognised. When they're recognised as real educators, then all of a sudden people will value them. They will have higher pay, higher status, professional paths that they can follow. But I think that's a massive challenge for the sector and educators at this point in time.
I guess there are three. The first is the status. People just don't understand what we're about. They don't understand what early years education is about. And so that there isn't therefore not, an appreciation, I guess, of what we do and why we do it. And it's not helped by the fact that there's two policies that disconnect. So one is provide childcare and the other is provide education and care. And they're separate and they're together. And they've never really unpacked those and exposed the different elements to make it happen. So that is a real problem because people are confused and therefore they don't understand, and therefore the status is then low and people feel unappreciated. They're tired since COVID, so people are leaving the sector, and recruitment and retention is like by far the biggest problem I've seen ever. I mean, we've seen it every now and then with poor policy decisions that were made, like say in 2016, but now it's incredible. People are also joining, and then they're overwhelmed by the amount of expectations placed upon them in the job. And then fundamentally, we can't afford to always pay them as much as they deserve. And that's the age-old perennial problem of funding, where it is not enough. And we get what, 2 pence increase this year on our funding, 2 pence. And we have a department that pays only 5% of its own budget on the sector. So seriously, so we're in a difficult dilemma on that. And particularly us when we work with children from more disadvantaged backgrounds, who really should be entitled to the whole 30 hours and are not getting it. And it's really not fair.
I think the challenges that educators face at the moment are driven a lot by the fact we've just been through a pandemic. So what we understood to be true about child development has been altered by the experience the children have had while they've been at home during the pandemic. And I think also around that as a wider issue is the fact that the curriculums that we have and the outcomes that we have, like things like good level of development, can often drive practitioners in a particular direction that doesn't always take into account the holistic approach around child development. So what I'm hoping is a positive that might come out of the pandemic is that we are all having to reevaluate what we do around early years education, and that some of those really positives will stay beyond now and become part of the fabric of what we do.
Oh, that's a big question, and yes, we know there are a number of challenges, things like recruitment and retention, things like access to training. But for me, because my focus and my area of specialism now is in health and wellbeing, I think the biggest thing, which is going into crisis level, is the obesity challenge. We now know that 1 in 4 children are starting school obese. We know that in the world, 1 in 6 of us are obese. So to me, that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we're facing our children and our families and our sector at the moment.
Oh, undoubtedly we need a wholesale review of how the sector is funded with additional resources in to recognise. I think one of the very positive elements from the pandemic was a greater understanding on the part of parents of the key role that practitioners, educators play in supporting their children. When they had them at home for long periods of time, they suddenly had a greater understanding of how skilled and dedicated the workforce is. And what I would really like to see is that dialogue is continued so that parents really, practitioners really work in partnership with parents to make sure that we get the best for children.
So technology, for me as a parent and as an educator, I do have my concerns about the overuse of technology, and I say that myself. My daughter says to me, and I think she's got it spot on, she says, but you're always talking about adults using tech too much, but you're always on your laptop. And I'm like, it's because I'm trying to get the message across, and then I have to check myself and go, no, right, So it's about, managing the benefits of screen time and also looking at the disadvantages. And I think also it can be used too easily as a child as something to detract children and keep them occupied instead of using it as an educational tool. So I think our workforce needs to be far more effectively trained in technology. And when we're looking at the other 5 Ps, which Chris has coined, it's about how do we now, post-COVID, teach our children how to live peacefully, with more tolerance, looking at how we live more sustainably, are we recycling, reusing our resources, where are we sourcing our foods from in earlier settings. So I think there's a lot of challenges around that, and also our children's mental health.
I'm guessing if you've asked this question to multiple people, obviously the pandemic is going to be the biggest one. And I think the fact of how long it is in a child's life is one of the biggest issues. So I'm getting phone calls from head teachers, from reception class teachers, from nurseries, saying that the children they're working with now seem different. They seem almost as if they're slightly younger than their age would suggest in some cases. And I suppose what we've got to remember is that for old people like me, early 20s, 2 years out of my life is not a huge chunk. But for a 3-year-old, that is more than half their life. For a 2-year-old, it is their life. And we're working with children who were born in the lockdown. So I think that is a huge challenge, is giving children back what they've missed. And a lot of that is joy. It's those moments of joy that we all took for granted as a child, and that's what's missing. It's not mentioned in EYFS, it's not mentioned in national curriculum or development matters, but actually it's a fundamental part of childhood, and I think we need to give children back some joy.
The biggest at the moment is recruitment. It's huge. Finding the right staff for the right setting is a nightmare. Qualified staff, it's a nightmare.
Is how do we look after our teachers, and how do we, trust them to do a good job, but not be loading them with so much sort of paperwork and stuff like that, and outcome-led education, when a lot of us know it's a lot about the process and the relationship. So that's it.
In the early years sector at the moment is recruitment, but I feel that it's something that can be easily changed is by putting more money into it, investing in people and paying more money.